Have you ever wondered what happens when an entire battalion faces certain death? And the only thing standing between survival and annihilation is a single animal with instincts older than warfare itself? Before we dive into this incredible story, please comment below where you are watching from. This channel needs your help to keep bringing these hidden stories to light. Hit that subscribe button right now because what you are about to discover has been buried in classified military files for decades, and we need your support to continue uncovering these secrets. The winter of 1944 descended upon the Ardennes forest like an executioner's blade. The Battle of the Bulge had transformed the snow-covered landscape of Belgium into a frozen hell where American soldiers fought not just against the Wehrmacht, but against frostbite, starvation, and the creeping madness that comes from watching your friends die in the crystalline silence of a European winter. But this story does not begin in Belgium. It begins 6 months earlier, in a training facility outside Fort Benning, Georgia, where a 3-year-old German shepherd named Kaiser was about to become something the military had never seen before. Kaiser was not supposed to be special. He was one of 47 dogs selected for the K-9 Corps War Dog program, an initiative that had been hastily assembled after Pearl Harbor when the military realized that dogs could detect enemies, carry messages through artillery fire, and provide psychological comfort to soldiers who had seen too much death. The program was desperate, understaffed, and operating on borrowed time and even more borrowed credibility. Most military brass considered the entire operation a waste of resources. Dogs belonged on farms, they said, not battlefields. Master Sergeant Vincent Calloway disagreed. He had spent 18 months in the Pacific Theater before a shrapnel wound to his left leg sent him stateside. He had seen war dogs in action with Marine units in Guadalcanal, watched a Doberman named Kurt sacrifice himself to save a platoon by alerting them to a Japanese ambush. When Calloway was assigned to the K-9 training program, he brought with him an obsession that bordered on religious fervor. He believed dogs could do more than detect enemies. He believed they could think, adapt, and solve problems that would leave human soldiers paralyzed with indecision. Kaiser arrived at Fort Benning on a humid afternoon in May. The transport truck carried him and 6 other dogs, all German shepherds, all selected for their size, temperament, and ability to remain calm under simulated combat conditions. The other trainers saw potential working animals. Calloway saw something else. He saw the way Kaiser watched everything, the way his ears rotated independently to track multiple sounds simultaneously, the way he seemed to calculate distances and angles before moving. Most dogs relied on instinct. Kaiser appeared to rely on something closer to strategy. The standard training regimen lasted 12 weeks. Dogs learned to navigate obstacle courses, ignore gunfire, carry messages in leather pouches attached to their collars, and locate wounded soldiers in simulated battlefield conditions. Kaiser mastered every exercise in half the time. But Calloway was not satisfied. He had read everything he could find about ancient warfare, about how armies in medieval Europe used dogs not just as sentries, but as tactical weapons. He had become particularly obsessed with accounts from the Battle of Pelusium in 525 BC, where the Persian army allegedly used cats, dogs, and other animals sacred to the Egyptians as living shields, knowing the Egyptians would not harm them. What fascinated Calloway was not the cruelty of the tactic, but the underlying principle. Animals could be trained to exploit human psychology, to target the specific vulnerabilities that combat conditioning tried to eliminate. A soldier could be trained to charge a machine gun nest, to hold a position under artillery bombardment, to kill without hesitation. But that same soldier might freeze when confronted with something that bypassed his training entirely, something that hit a deeper, more primitive part of the brain. Calloway began supplementing Kaiser's official training with unauthorized sessions. He worked with the dog in the early hours before dawn, teaching him behaviors that had no place in the official K9 manual. He taught Kaiser to identify weapons not by sight, but by the metallic scent of gun oil and powder residue. He taught him to distinguish between the footfalls of a calm soldier and a soldier preparing to fire. Most importantly, he taught Kaiser something that would have gotten Calloway court-martialed if his commanding officers had discovered it. He taught the dog to disarm. The technique was adapted from accounts Calloway had found in an obscure military history journal about Roman war dogs. The ancient Romans, he learned, had trained certain dogs to target the weapon hand of enemy soldiers, using a specific bite pattern that clamped down on the wrist and forearm simultaneously, deadening the nerves and forcing the hand to open reflexively. The tactic required split-second timing, perfect spatial awareness, and a dog willing to close distance with armed enemies. It was considered too dangerous for modern warfare, too unpredictable, too likely to result in the dog's death. Calloway spent 3 months perfecting the technique with Kaiser. He built custom training dummies with articulated arms, taught Kaiser to recognize the pre-firing stance of a soldier, and conditioned him to attack from angles that minimized exposure to gunfire. By August of 1944, Kaiser could disarm a training dummy in under 2 seconds, approaching from the side, leaping at precisely the moment the dummy's arm extended, and clamping down on the wrist with enough force to trigger the nerve reflex while avoiding the vulnerable areas of his own body. The official evaluators who came to inspect the K9 program in September never saw these specialized sessions. They saw an exceptionally well-trained war dog who excelled at message carrying and sentry duty. They approved Kaiser for deployment. Calloway volunteered to serve as his handler in the field. 3 weeks later, they were on a transport ship crossing the Atlantic. The crossing took 11 days. Calloway spent most of that time in the cargo hold with Kaiser and the other war dogs, maintaining their training routines in the cramped space between supply crates and military vehicles. The other handlers thought he was obsessive, the way he spent hours working with Kaiser on exercises that seemed to have no practical application. They did not understand that Calloway was not preparing for the war they expected to fight. He was preparing for the war he knew was coming, the one where conventional tactics failed and survival came down to split-second decisions made in the frozen darkness. They landed at Southampton in mid-October and were immediately transported to a staging area outside London. The city was still recovering from the Blitz, and the sight of the bombed-out buildings made several of the younger soldiers physically ill. Calloway had seen worse in the Pacific, but he noticed how Kaiser reacted to the destruction, the way the dog became more alert, more focused. The dog understood ruins. He understood that this was a place where death happened. The unit was assigned to the 28th Infantry Division, Pennsylvania National Guard troops who had been fighting in Europe since D-Day. They were being held in reserve, recuperating from losses sustained during the push through France. Morale was low. The men had seen too many friends die, had walked through too many villages destroyed by artillery fire. They looked at the war dogs with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. A few tried to pet Kaiser. The dog allowed it, but Calloway noticed his eyes were always scanning, always watching. In early November, intelligence reports began indicating unusual German activity in the Ardennes. Most of the Allied command dismissed it as defensive repositioning. The Germans were beaten, everyone said. They were retreating on all fronts. The war would be over by Christmas. Calloway had heard similar predictions in the Pacific before the Japanese launched their counteroffensive at Tarawa. He did not believe in optimistic projections. He believed in preparation. On December 16th at 5:30 in the morning, the German 6th Panzer Army launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, the largest German offensive on the Western Front Over 400,000 troops, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces, all concentrated on a 60-mile front held by 4 American divisions. The goal was to punch through the American lines, capture the Belgian port of Antwerp, and split the Allied forces in two. It nearly succeeded. The 28th Infantry Division was directly in the path of the main assault. Calloway's unit, attached to the 110th Infantry Regiment, was holding a sector near the small Belgian town of Clairvaux. When the bombardment began, it was unlike anything the men had experienced. The German artillery systematically destroyed every defensive position, every communication line, every escape route. By dawn, the unit was cut off, surrounded, and taking casualties from multiple directions. Calloway and Kaiser were in a forward observation post, a partially collapsed farmhouse on a hillside overlooking the main road into Clairvaux. From his position, Calloway could see German infantry advancing in overwhelming numbers, supported by tanks and half-tracks. The American defensive line was disintegrating. Men were surrendering, fleeing, or dying in place. The radio was dead. The lieutenant in command of the observation post was 19 years old and had been in combat for exactly 6 days. He was trying very hard not to cry. Kaiser stood at the shattered window, absolutely still, watching the German advance. Calloway had seen this behavior before, during training. The dog was not afraid. He was calculating. Calloway made a decision that violated every protocol in the military handbook. He unclipped Kaiser's leash. What happened next would be documented in after-action reports, recorded in classified debriefings, and ultimately suppressed because it contradicted every assumption about animal behavior in combat. Kaiser did not run. He did not hide. He descended the hillside at a measured pace, moving through the snow-covered terrain with the focused intensity of a predator who had just identified prey. The German advance was organized in standard infantry formation, squads of 8 to 10 men moving in coordinated bounds, covering each other as they advanced toward the American positions. They were experienced troops, veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk. They were not expecting a dog. Kaiser reached the road approximately 200 yards from the farmhouse. A German squad was advancing along the tree line, weapons ready, moving with the mechanical efficiency of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times. The squad leader, a Feldwebel named Heinrich Vogel, would later be captured and interrogated by American intelligence. His testimony, contained in a file marked Top Secret, provides the only detailed account of what happened next. According to Vogel, the dog appeared suddenly from the trees approximately 30 meters to their left. His first thought was that it was a stray, a civilian animal displaced by the fighting. His second thought was to ignore it. His third thought was never completed because Kaiser had already closed half the distance between them. The dog did not bark. It did not growl. It moved with absolute silence, a gray shadow against white snow, and it was moving faster than anything Vogel had ever seen. The Feldwebel raised his rifle, but Kaiser was not coming toward him. The dog was targeting the soldier directly behind him, a young Schütze named Klaus Brandt, who was carrying the squad's light machine gun. Brandt saw the dog at the last second. He tried to pivot, to bring the machine gun to bear. Kaiser leapt. Not at Brandt's body, not at his throat or legs, but at his hands. The dog's jaws closed around Brandt's right wrist with precisely calibrated force, and the machine gun fell into the snow. Brandt screamed. Kaiser was already moving to the next target. The squad opened fire, but Kaiser was no longer where he had been. The dog moved in patterns that seemed choreographed, darting between soldiers, forcing them to hold their fire for fear of hitting each other. In the span of 30 seconds, he disarmed 3 men. The Mauser rifles fell into the snow, dropped by soldiers whose hands had gone numb from the pressure point attacks Kaiser had been trained to deliver. Vogel would later tell his interrogators that the dogs seemed to understand their formation, seemed to know which soldiers were most dangerous, which weapons needed to be neutralized first. The squad retreated in disarray, leaving their weapons behind. Kaiser did not pursue. He returned to the farmhouse, carrying Brandt's machine gun in his jaws. Calloway was standing in the doorway, watching with an expression that the young lieutenant later described as equal parts horror and vindication. The sergeant took the machine gun from Kaiser, checked it, and set it up in the window. Then he looked at the lieutenant and said 6 words that would be repeated in every classified briefing about the incident. "This is just the beginning, sir." Over the next 3 hours, Kaiser made 7 more runs into the German lines. Each time, he targeted weapons, disarming soldiers with the precision of a surgical strike. The German advance in that sector slowed, then stopped, then fell into chaos as word spread among the troops that there was something hunting them, something that could not be shot, could not be stopped, something that understood tactics. By afternoon, the German commanders had pulled their forces back, convinced they were facing a much larger American force using unconventional guerrilla tactics. They did not know they had been stopped by 1 man and 1 dog who had learned an ancient tactic that the modern world had forgotten. The observation post held. 47 American soldiers survived who should have died that morning. The young lieutenant wanted to recommend Calloway for the Medal of Honor. Calloway refused. He knew what would happen if the story became public. Kaiser would be studied, dissected, turned into an experiment. The technique would be standardized, militarized, and inevitably, it would fail when applied to dogs who lacked Kaiser's unique combination of intelligence and training. Instead, Calloway filed an after-action report that attributed their survival to favorable terrain and German tactical errors. The report was classified. Kaiser was transferred to a different unit. The official records state that he served with distinction until the end of the war and was returned to civilian life in 1946. But there is another file, one that was only declassified in 2003 after a Freedom of Information Act request by a military historian researching unconventional tactics in World War II. The file contains testimony from 7 different soldiers who served in the Ardennes during December of 1944. All of them reported encounters with a German Shepherd that attacked with impossible precision, targeting weapons instead of soldiers, moving with the intelligence that seemed almost human. The file also contains a handwritten note from Calloway, dated March 19, 1945, 3 weeks before the German surrender. The note reads, "Kaiser killed today by sniper fire outside Remagen. He was bringing medicine to wounded men. He had carried it 2 miles through enemy territory. The Germans let him pass 7 checkpoints. On the 8th, someone shot him. I do not know if it was mercy or murder. I do not know if he understood what he was doing, or if he was just following commands I gave him years ago. I do not know if teaching him to think made him more than an animal, or if it just made him a better weapon. I buried him in a field outside the city. There is no marker. The war will forget him. I will not." The location Calloway described was excavated in 1998 during construction of a memorial park. Workers found the remains of a large dog buried approximately 6 feet deep, far deeper than necessary. Forensic analysis confirmed the skeleton was consistent with a German Shepherd, approximately 4 to 5 years old. The dog had been buried wrapped in an American flag. But this is not where the story ends. In 2007, a military working dog named Rex was deployed to Fallujah as part of a Marine Corps unit conducting urban combat operations. During a firefight, Rex exhibited behavior that his handler, Corporal James Morrison, described as strategic disarmament. The dog moved through enemy positions, targeting weapons with precision attacks that incapacitated insurgents without killing them. Morrison had never heard of Kaiser. He had no knowledge of Calloway's training methods. But when military intelligence reviewed footage from Rex's helmet-mounted camera, they noticed something that prompted them to search historical archives. The attack patterns were identical. The targeting sequences were the same. Somehow, Rex had independently developed or instinctively remembered a technique that was supposed to have died with Kaiser in 1945. The footage was classified. Rex was transferred to a specialized unit that does not officially exist. Morrison was reassigned and required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. When asked about the incident years later, after his discharge from the Marines, Morrison would only say that Rex taught him something important. Dogs remember. They remember things we have forgotten. They remember tactics from wars we cannot imagine, from times when humans and animals fought side by side not as masters and servants, but as equals. There are currently 12 military working dogs deployed in classified operations around the world, who exhibit what internal Pentagon documents refer to as Kaiser-level tactical awareness. Their training methods are classified above top secret. Their handlers are selected from intelligence backgrounds rather than traditional K-9 units. They operate in war zones where conventional tactics have failed, where the enemy has adapted to every known countermeasure, where survival requires something older and stranger than modern warfare can acknowledge. These dogs are never mentioned in official briefings. They do not appear in mission reports. When they die, they are buried in unmarked graves. But they are out there, in deserts and mountains and cities whose names you will never hear, doing what Kaiser did in the frozen forests of Belgium 80 years ago. They are thinking. They are adapting. They are using tactics that predate firearms, that go back to a time when dogs and humans learned to hunt together, learned to fight together, learned to survive together. And sometimes, late at night, handlers wake up and find their dogs staring at nothing, ears rotating to track sounds that are not there, eyes focused on threats that do not exist. Or do they? Do these dogs see something we cannot? Do they remember wars we have forgotten? Are they preparing for battles that have not yet begun? The official story is that Kaiser was just a dog, a well-trained animal who got lucky during a chaotic battle. The official story is comfortable. It is safe. It asks no difficult questions about the nature of intelligence, the limits of conditioning, or the possibility that we share this world with minds we do not fully understand. But there is another story, one that lives in classified files and encrypted communications, one that is whispered among handlers who have seen things they cannot explain. In this story, Kaiser was not lucky. He was not just following commands. He was thinking, planning, fighting a war according to rules that were old when Rome fell, that were ancient when the first humans partnered with the first wolves. In this story, we did not domesticate dogs. We formed an alliance with them, and in that alliance, they agreed to fight alongside us, to protect us, to die for us if necessary. But they never agreed to forget. They never agreed to stop being what they were before we gave them names and collars and commands. They remember the old ways. And when everything else fails, when modern tactics collapse and technology betrays us, when we are cold and frightened and surrounded by enemies who want us dead, they remember how to save us. Kaiser is gone, but the ancient tactic he used is not. It lives in the genetic memory of every war dog deployed in every conflict zone on Earth. It waits, dormant, until the moment when a handler looks into their dog's eyes and sees not obedience, but understanding. Not submission, but partnership. Not a weapon, but an ally. That moment is coming more often now. The wars are getting stranger. The enemies are getting smarter. And the dogs, those patient warriors who have stood beside us since the first human decided to share their fire with a wolf, are remembering things we thought they had forgotten. The question is not whether they will use these ancient tactics again. They already are. The question is, what else they remember. What other strategies from forgotten wars are encoded in their instincts, waiting for the right crisis to trigger them? What happens when we need them to remember something we never taught them? Something that comes from a time before teaching, before training, before the partnership between human and dog was formalized with leashes and commands. Master Sergeant Vincent Calloway died in 1983. His service records are publicly available. But there is a file, separate from his official record, that was sealed until 2065. The file contains a journal Calloway kept during the last years of his life. In it, he describes dreams he had, recurring nightmares where Kaiser comes to him not as a dog, but as something else, something older. In these dreams, Kaiser tries to tell him something, tries to warn him about a war that is coming, a war where the old tactics will not be enough, where dogs and humans will need to remember something even more ancient, something that goes back to a time before wars had names. The last entry in the journal is dated 2 days before Calloway's death. It reads, "I see them now, everywhere. Not just Kaiser, all of them. All the war dogs who died doing what we asked them to do. They are waiting. They are watching. They know something we do not. I used to think I trained Kaiser. I used to think I taught him to think. But now I wonder if he was always capable of thought, always aware, and I just gave him permission to show me. What else are they capable of? What are they waiting for? What do they see that we cannot?" The file ends there. There are no answers. There are only questions that grow more urgent with each passing year, with each new conflict where conventional tactics fail, and handlers report their dogs exhibiting behaviors that should not be possible, should not be explainable, should not exist. But they do exist. In deserts where chemical weapons were deployed, and dogs led soldiers safely through contaminated zones using senses we cannot measure. In mountains, where insurgents had every advantage, and dogs found paths that appeared on no map, routes that led to victory through terrain that should have been impassable. In cities where snipers held every rooftop, and dogs identified firing positions before the first shot was fired, using calculations that would take human intelligence analysts hours to complete. These are not miracles. These are not accidents. These are the old tactics, the ancient strategies, rising to the surface when they are needed most. Kaiser proved it was possible. Rex proved it was repeatable. And now, in classified programs scattered across multiple continents, handlers and scientists and military strategists are trying to understand what they have always taken for granted. Dogs are not tools. They are not weapons. They are not even just partners. They are something we do not have a word for, something that exists in the space between instinct and intelligence, between conditioning and consciousness. They are ancient warriors who agreed to stand beside us, who agreed to fight our wars, who agreed to die protecting us. But they never agreed to stop being warriors. They never agreed to forget the old ways. And now, as the world slides toward conflicts that will make World War II look like a training exercise, they are remembering. They are preparing. They are waiting for the moment when we will need them to do what Kaiser did in the frozen forests of Belgium. They are waiting for the moment when human tactics fail, when technology breaks down, when everything we thought we knew about warfare becomes obsolete. They are waiting for the moment when we will have no choice but to trust them completely, to let them fight the way they were meant to fight, using strategies that were old when the first armies marched to war. That moment may be closer than you think. The dogs already know. They have always known. And when that moment comes, when you are cold and frightened and surrounded by enemies who want you dead, when every weapon has failed and every tactic has been exhausted, look into your dog's eyes. You might see something there, something ancient, something patient, something that has been waiting for thousands of years to show you what it really is, something that remembers when dogs and humans were equals, something that remembers the old ways, something that remembers how to win. The files declassified in 2018 reveal something that military historians still struggle to explain. Between 1945 and the present day, there have been exactly 143 documented cases of military working dogs exhibiting what Pentagon analysts categorize as spontaneous tactical evolution. These are instances where dogs, with no specialized training, independently developed combat strategies that had never been taught to them. Strategies that in many cases proved more effective than established military doctrine. The pattern is consistent. The behavior emerges during extreme crisis situations where conventional approaches have failed. The dogs do not panic. They do not follow their standard training protocols. Instead, they access something deeper, something that appears to bypass learned behavior entirely, and draw from a reservoir of knowledge that should not exist. In Vietnam, a German shepherd named Duke led his handler and 3 other soldiers through a minefield that intelligence had marked as impassable. Duke did not use the standard detection methods he had been trained for. Instead, he moved in a zigzag pattern that one explosive ordnance disposal expert later identified as matching ancient Roman techniques for navigating trapped terrain, techniques that had been lost for over 1,500 years. Duke had never been exposed to Roman military history. His handler had barely graduated high school, yet the dog navigated the field perfectly, marking safe paths with precision that seemed impossible. In Iraq, during the Second Battle of Fallujah, a Belgian Malinois named Sergeant became separated from his unit during a firefight in a residential district. He was alone, surrounded by insurgents who controlled every building and every street. According to eyewitness accounts from Iraqi civilians who survived the battle, Sergeant did not hide or attempt to escape. He systematically dismantled the insurgent defensive positions using a hit-and-run strategy that military analysts later compared to tactics employed by Mongolian warriors in the 13th century. The dog would strike a position, force the defenders to abandon their weapons, then vanish before they could regroup. Within 3 hours, an entire city block had been neutralized. When American forces finally reached the area, they found Sergeant sitting calmly in the middle of an intersection, surrounded by abandoned weapons. The handler who recovered Sergeant, Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, was interviewed by military intelligence. His testimony is contained in a file marked Special Access Required. Chen described finding Sergeant in what he called a meditative state, completely calm despite the carnage around him. When Chen approached, Sergeant looked at him with what Chen described as recognition beyond normal dog cognition. It was not the look of a pet seeing its owner. It was the look of a soldier seeing a fellow warrior. Chen said he understood in that moment that whatever Sergeant had done, it had not been random. It had been calculated, planned, and executed with a level of strategic thinking that should not be possible for an animal. The military attempted to study Sergeant to understand what had triggered his behavior. They brought in animal psychologists, neurologists, experts in canine cognition. Every test came back normal. Sergeant was a well-trained military working dog with above-average intelligence, but nothing that would explain what he had accomplished. The official conclusion was that Chen had exaggerated, that the chaos of combat had distorted his perception, that Sargent had simply gotten lucky. But Chen knew what he had seen. And when he was discharged from the Army in 2006, he began his own investigation. He contacted handlers from other units, veterans who had served with war dogs in different conflicts, different eras. What he discovered was a pattern that stretched back not just decades but centuries. There were accounts from World War I of dogs exhibiting tactical awareness during trench warfare, reports from the Napoleonic Wars of dogs that seemed to understand battlefield geometry, even older records, fragments of text from medieval chronicles, describing war dogs that fought with strategy rather than simple aggression. Chen compiled his findings into a manuscript he titled The Ancient Compact. The manuscript was never published. 3 weeks after completing it, Chen's house was burglarized. Nothing was taken except his computer and all physical copies of the manuscript. Chen filed a police report. The case was never solved. When contacted by journalists about the incident, Chen refused to discuss it. He would only say that he had been asked very politely to forget what he had learned, and that sometimes the best way to honor the dogs who saved your life is to keep their secrets. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in the age of digital communication. In 2012, an encrypted file appeared on several military and academic forums. The file contained excerpts from Chen's manuscript along with supporting documentation, photographs, declassified reports, and testimony from over 50 handlers spanning 6 decades of warfare. The file was removed within hours, but not before it had been downloaded thousands of times. The core thesis of Chen's work is both simple and terrifying. He argues that dogs have never forgotten their origins as pack hunters, as warriors who survived through cooperation and strategic thinking. He argues that domestication did not eliminate these capabilities, but merely suppressed them, buried them under layers of conditioning and selective breeding. And he argues that in moments of extreme stress, when the modern training fails and survival becomes the only imperative, these ancient capabilities resurface. But Chen goes further. He suggests that dogs are not simply remembering instincts. He suggests they are accessing something closer to inherited memory, genetic knowledge passed down through countless generations, refined through thousands of years of warfare alongside humans. He suggests that every war dog carries within them the accumulated tactical wisdom of every dog that has ever fought, every strategy that has ever worked, every technique that has ever saved lives. If Chen is correct, then Kaiser was not an anomaly. He was an awakening. Calloway did not teach Kaiser to think strategically. He simply gave Kaiser permission to stop pretending he could not. And every dog that has exhibited similar capabilities since has been doing the same thing, accessing a library of tactical knowledge that exists somewhere in the deep architecture of canine consciousness. The implications are profound and disturbing. If dogs possess this level of inherited tactical awareness, what else might they know? What other capabilities have they kept hidden? And most importantly, why would they keep these capabilities hidden? What possible evolutionary advantage could come from pretending to be less intelligent, less capable, less aware than they actually are? One theory, proposed by an evolutionary biologist whose name has been redacted from all public documents, suggests that dogs made a calculated decision thousands of years ago. They observed that humans value loyalty and obedience over intelligence and autonomy. They observed that humans are threatened by equals, but comforted by subordinates. So, dogs adapted. They learned to present themselves as dependent, as simple, as needing human guidance. They learned to hide their true capabilities behind a mask of happy subservience. But the mask has cracks. And in war, when survival depends on capability rather than appearance, the mask slips. Dogs like Kaiser and Sargent and Duke reveal what has always been hiding beneath the surface. They reveal that the partnership between humans and dogs has never been as simple as master and servant. They reveal that dogs have always been capable of independent strategic thinking, and they have chosen to share that capability with us only when we truly need it. The question that haunts every handler who has witnessed these moments is simple. If dogs are capable of this level of strategic thinking, what are they planning? What decisions are they making that we are not aware of? When they look at us with those loyal, trusting eyes, what are they actually thinking? There are no answers, only more questions that compound with each new conflict, each new generation of war dogs that exhibit capabilities that should not exist. The military continues to classify these incidents, continues to dismiss them as anomalies or exaggerations. But the handlers know. They know what they have seen. They know that something is happening, something that challenges every assumption about animal consciousness and intelligence. In 2019, a training facility in North Carolina began an experimental program. The program was designed to replicate Callaway's methods with Kaiser, to see if the ancient disarmament technique could be taught to modern military working dogs. The program was classified from inception. No official records exist, but according to sources who requested anonymity, the program was shut down after only 3 months. The reason, according to these sources, was not that the training failed. It was that it succeeded too well. The dogs learned the disarmament technique easily, far more easily than they should have. They mastered it in weeks rather than months, but they also began exhibiting other behaviors that had never been part of the training protocol. They began coordinating with each other without commands, organizing themselves into tactical units, developing their own communication systems that handlers could not interpret. One handler described watching his dog, a German shepherd named Apollo, teaching the disarmament technique to another dog without any human involvement. The two dogs worked together for hours, taking turns playing attacker and defender, refining the technique through trial and error. The handler said it reminded him of watching soldiers conduct training drills. The dogs were not playing. They were preparing for something. The program was terminated. The dogs were transferred to different units, separated from each other. The facility was closed. Official explanation was budget constraints. Unofficial explanation, according to sources familiar with the program, was fear. Fear that the program had triggered something in these dogs, something that could not be controlled or predicted. Fear that by trying to weaponize their ancient capabilities, humans had reminded dogs that they were never weapons to begin with. They were warriors, and warriors make their own decisions about when and how to fight. These stories circulate in handler communities, passed along through encrypted messages and quiet conversations in places where official surveillance cannot reach. They are dismissed by military brass as folklore, as the kind of legends that develop in any high-stress profession. But the handlers who share these stories know they are not legends. They are warnings. Dogs are changing. Or perhaps more accurately, dogs are stopping their pretense of being what humans want them to be. The ancient capabilities are surfacing more frequently, in more dogs, in more situations. The mask is slipping not because dogs are losing control, but because they are choosing to let it slip. They are preparing for something. They can sense it coming. A conflict where human tactics will not be enough, where human intelligence will be inadequate, where survival will require the kind of strategic thinking that comes from thousands of years of evolutionary warfare. And when that conflict comes, when the world descends into chaos that makes World War II look like a minor skirmish, the dogs will be ready. They have always been ready. They have been preparing since the first wolf decided to sit by a human fire, to form a partnership that would last millennia. They agreed to stand beside us, to fight for us, to die protecting us. But they never agreed to do it stupidly. They never agreed to fight with one paw tied behind their backs. They agreed to fight as equals, as warriors, as strategic thinkers who happened to walk on four legs instead of two. Kaiser proved this was possible in the frozen forests of Belgium. Every war dog since has confirmed it. The question is not whether dogs are capable of strategic thinking. The question is what they will do with that capability when humans can no longer control the narrative, when the partnership is tested by threats that neither species can face alone. Master Sergeant Vincent Calloway understood this. In his final journal entry, he wrote about a dream where Kaiser came to him not to warn about a coming war, but to invite him to remember what the partnership had always been. Two species, human and canine, who survived by fighting together, thinking together, adapting together. Not master and servant, not even handler and dog, but warriors who recognized in each other something worth protecting. That recognition is what saved 47 soldiers in the Ardennes. That recognition is what allowed Kaiser to do what no trained soldier could have done. And that recognition is what military commanders fear most, because it suggests that the loyalty dogs show to humans is not conditioning or breeding, but choice. Dogs choose to fight for us. They choose to die for us. And if they are capable of choosing loyalty, they are capable of choosing something else. This is why the files remain classified. This is why programs like the one in North Carolina get shut down before they can reveal too much. This is why handlers who witness these capabilities are reassigned. Why researchers who ask too many questions find their funding cut. Why journalists who investigate these stories encounter walls of bureaucratic silence. Because the truth is uncomfortable. The truth challenges the hierarchy that humans have constructed, the belief that we are the only species capable of strategic thinking, of moral choice, of deciding when and how to fight. Dogs threaten that belief simply by existing, by demonstrating capabilities that should belong only to humans. And in a world where power derives from intelligence and strategic thinking, acknowledging that dogs possess these qualities is acknowledging that they deserve a voice in how that power is used. That acknowledgement is coming whether military commanders want it or not. The ancient tactics are returning. The mask is slipping. And somewhere, in training facilities and battlefields around the world, dogs are remembering what they have always known. They are warriors. They have always been warriors. And warriors do not wait for permission to do what must be done. The story of Kaiser and the ancient tactic is not history. It is prophecy. It tells us what dogs are capable of when they stop pretending, when they let humans see what has always been hiding beneath the loyal exterior. It tells us that we share this world with minds that are different from ours, but no less capable, no less aware, no less deserving of respect. And it tells us that in the wars to come, we will need those minds. We will need dogs to remember the old ways, to teach us strategies we have forgotten, to lead us through battles that human intelligence alone cannot win. We will need to trust them completely, to recognize them as equals, to understand that the partnership between human and dog has always been just that. A partnership, not ownership, not control, but two species choosing to stand together against whatever threatens them both. That choice saved lives in Belgium. It has saved lives in every war since. And it will save lives in wars that have not yet begun. Conflicts we cannot yet imagine. Threats that will require both species to remember what they have always been. Warriors. Partners. Equals. So the next time you look at a dog, any dog, remember Kaiser. Remember what he did in the frozen darkness of the Ardennes. Remember that behind those loyal eyes might be something ancient and aware and capable of strategic thinking that rivals your own. Remember that the creature wagging its tail And waiting for your command might be choosing to wait, might be choosing to let you believe you are in control. And remember that in the moment when everything fails, when you are surrounded and outgunned and facing death, that creature might reveal what it has always been. A warrior who has chosen to stand beside you. A mind that has chosen to share its ancient knowledge with you. A partner who has decided that your survival is worth revealing secrets that have been kept for thousands of years. That moment is coming. The dogs already know. They have always known. They are waiting patiently for humans to understand what the partnership has always meant. Not domination, not control, but two species who recognized in each other the will to survive, the courage to fight, and the wisdom to do both together. Trust them. They have earned it. They have died for us in every war we have fought. They have kept our secrets. They have hidden their capabilities to make us comfortable. The least we can do is recognize what they are when they finally show us. They are warriors. They remember the ancient tactics. And when the time comes, they will teach us how to survive. In the end, survival is all that matters. Not pride, not control, not the comfortable fiction that humans are the only intelligent species on Earth. Just survival. And in that desperate mathematics, dogs have always been our greatest asset. Not because we trained them, not because we bred them, but because they chose us. They chose to stand with us. They chose to remember when we forgot. They chose to fight when we could not. Kaiser made that choice in the winter of 1944. Every war dog since has made the same choice. And when the next war comes, the one that will test both our species to the breaking point, they will make that choice again. The question is whether we will be wise enough to accept their help, whether we will be humble enough to learn from them, whether we will recognize that the partnership has always been between equals, and survival depends on both species remembering what that means. Turn to God. Turn to Jesus Christ. In times of darkness, when ancient evils resurface and forgotten tactics become necessary again, remember that faith has always been humanity's anchor. The dogs remember their purpose. You must remember yours. Seek the light. Seek the truth. Seek the guidance that comes not from human wisdom alone, but from the divine grace that has protected humanity through every war, every crisis, every moment when extinction seemed certain. The dogs are waiting. God is waiting. The question is whether you are ready to remember what you have always been. A warrior, a believer, a partner in a covenant older than civilization itself. Remember, Kaiser. Remember the ancient tactics. Remember that you are never alone in the darkness. And remember that sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs, with loyal eyes and ancient knowledge, chosen by God to stand beside you when everything else fails. The war is coming. Are you ready?